The Duke mocked his bride. "She will give me a son and nothing more," until the veil was lifted. She heard him say it. That is the part nobody knew. Not his mother. Not the assembled guests of Crestwood Manor waiting in the east drawing room. Not the 4 bridesmaids adjusting the 16 feet of ivory silk that would trail behind her down the aisle in 40 minutes. Nobody knew that Rosalind Vane had been standing on the other side of a door that was not fully closed when Edmund Ashford, Duke of Crestwood, said to his closest friend in the low easy voice of a man who believes he is not being heard, "She will give me a son and nothing more. That is all I require from this arrangement." His friend laughed. Edmund did not. Because he had not said it as a joke. Rosalind stood on the other side of that door in 16 feet of ivory silk with her veil not yet lowered and her hands folded in front of her, and she understood, with the specific clean clarity of a woman who has just heard the truest thing a situation has yet produced, exactly what she was walking into. She did not run. She did not cry. She reached up. She lowered her veil. She turned to her maid of honor and said, "It is time." And she walked down that aisle with the specific composure of a woman who has decided that knowing the truth about something is always better than being protected from it. Stay with me. Because what Rosalind Vane did with what she heard through that door, what she built inside a marriage that began with those 11 words, and what happened the morning the veil was lifted and Edmund Ashford finally understood what had been standing in front of him the entire time, that is a story that is going to reach something in you. Subscribe to Duke's Secret before we go any further. Every story on this channel is built to mean something after it ends. Hit the bell. Now let's go. Her name was Rosalind Vane. 22 years old. Eldest daughter of Sir Percival Vane, a man of quiet dignity, modest means, and the specific kind of love for his daughter that expressed itself not in grand gestures but in the accumulated evidence of 1,000 small attentions. He remembered what she said. He asked follow-up questions. He laughed at her observations and told her when she was wrong and never once suggested that being wrong was something to be ashamed of. She had grown up knowing she was worth knowing. That is the most important thing to understand about Rosalind Vane before everything else. She had not grown up wealthy. The Vane estate was comfortable in the specific way of houses that have been loved longer than they have been funded, beautiful in the bones, maintained by care rather than money, carrying the particular warmth of a place where people had actually been happy inside it. She had a younger sister, Clara, 19 and loud in all the best ways, who had cried actual tears when the marriage arrangement was announced and had then dried them and said, "You are the strongest person I know and I will be at that wedding and I will be watching everything." Rosalind had said, "I know. Do not make a face at the Duke." Clara had said, "I make no promises." She had 2 close friends, Margot, sharp and loyal, who had known her since they were 12, and Isabel, quieter, observant, the kind of woman who noticed what other people's faces did when they thought nobody was watching. Between the 3 of them there were no performances. Only honesty. She had been, before the arrangement, genuinely happy. She read. She painted, not with the decorative competence that was expected of women in her world, but with the specific obsessive engagement of someone for whom painting was the place where the inside of her mind became visible. Her father had given her the north room of the house as a studio when she was 15. "The north light," he said. "You need the north light. It does not lie." She had loved her father for that more than she could say. She had never been in love. She had been close, once, a young man named Thomas who had talked to her about books with the genuine enthusiasm of someone who had also spent his life being told he read too much. But Thomas had gone to the continent and the distance had done what distances do when the foundation is more potential than actual, and she had sat with the loss for 1 season and then moved forward, which was what Rosalind Vane did with difficult things. She processed them honestly and she moved forward. The arrangement was proposed in March. Her father came to her in the north room while she was working, which meant he understood that what he was about to say required her to be somewhere she felt like herself. He said, "Edmund Ashford has expressed interest in a formal arrangement." She set down her brush. She said, "What is he like?" Her father was quiet for a moment in the way of a man who loves his daughter and is trying to be honest and is finding honesty difficult. He said, "He is powerful. Respected. The Crestwood name is among the most significant in the empire. He is not cruel. There is no suggestion of cruelty." She said, "That is what he is." I asked what he is like. Her father looked at her. He said, "He is a man who has organized his entire life around function. Who has decided that efficiency is the same as wisdom. Who has, I believe, never once been asked to examine that assumption. He is not a bad man, Rosalind. He is an incomplete one." She picked up her brush. She said, "And you need me to marry him." He said, "I need you to know that I would not ask this if there were another way. And I need you to know that whatever you decide I will find another way." She looked at the painting she had been working on. A coastal scene. Gray water under gray sky. A single figure at the far edge facing away towards something the painting did not show. She said, "I will do it." He said, "Rosalind." She said, "I will do it because I have spent 22 years learning to see clearly. And I would rather walk into a difficult thing with my eyes open than be protected from it. That is not bravery. That is just how I am built." Her father looked at her for a long time. Then he said, "The North Light. It does not lie." She understood he was talking about her. She met Edmund Ashford twice before the wedding. The first time at a formal reception hosted by Lord Aldermere. 2 hours. Supervised. He was tall, dark-haired, composed in the way of someone who has learned that composure costs nothing and reveals nothing and therefore maintains it as a default. He asked appropriate questions. He listened with the attentiveness of someone completing a task. He was not unpleasant. He was, she noted with the clear honest part of her mind that noted things, entirely absent from the interaction while being present in it. Like a house with all the lights on and nobody inside. The second meeting was a brief formal call at the Vane house. 30 minutes. Tea. Her father present. Edmund spoke about the Crestwood estate with the matter-of-fact authority of someone describing infrastructure. She asked him one genuine question, whether he had a preference in the gardens or whether the head gardener operated independently. He looked at her as though the question was unexpected. He said, "The head gardener manages the gardens." She said, "Of course. I only ask because I paint and north-facing aspects interest me for practical reasons. I wondered whether there was flexibility in how the grounds are used." He said, "The grounds are extensive. I imagine there is flexibility." She noted the "I imagine." The distance in it. The fact that he did not know and had not thought to know. She filed it away. On the morning of the wedding she was in the bridal preparation room with her 4 bridesmaids and Margot and Clara when she needed a moment alone. Just one moment, not from fear, not from doubt, but from the specific need of a woman who processes things internally to have 60 seconds of silence before a significant event. She stepped into the corridor. The door at the end was not fully closed. She heard his voice. "She will give me a son and nothing more. That is all I require from this arrangement." She stood very still. She heard every word with the specific clarity of a woman whose hearing has been sharpened by a lifetime of paying attention to what people say when they think they are not being heard. Then she lowered her veil. And she walked down the aisle. The wedding breakfast was a performance Rosalind observed with the clear detached attention of a woman who has decided to use observation as her primary tool in a situation she cannot control. 140 guests. The Crestwood dining room enormous and gilded and arranged with the specific impersonal perfection of a household that runs on precision rather than warmth. Edmund sat beside her at the head table and spoke to her with the correct frequency and the correct tone and the complete absence of anything actual behind either. She spoke back with equal correctness. She noted the faces around the table. Edmund's mother, Lady Ashford, 60 or so, with the expression of a woman who has spent 40 years managing a household around a man very similar to her son and has made her peace with it. Edmund's closest friend Carlyle, the one who had laughed, she found him immediately, identified him by the slight discomfort he carried every time he looked at her, the specific guilt of someone who knows a thing he has not confessed. Two distant cousins who watched Edmund with the transparent calculation of people assessing an inheritance. And at the far end of the table, almost lost in the crowd, her father watching her with the expression she knew, the one that said, "I am here and I am watching and I am not going anywhere." She held that. She arrived at Crestwood Manor as its Duchess on a Tuesday in September. She had made a decision in the carriage. Not a dramatic one. Not an angry one. Simply a clear private decision made by a woman who has processed a difficult truth and arrived at the other side of it with a plan. She was going to know this place completely. Not to perform the role of Duchess. Not to produce the appearance of a functioning marriage for the benefit of a social world that would be watching. She was going to know it the way she knew the North Room, through presence, through attention, through the honest engagement of someone who understands that a place reveals itself to the people who stay long enough to actually look. Edmund had said she would give him a son and nothing more. He would discover that he had significantly underestimated what nothing more looked like when it belonged to Rosalind Vane. She spent the first week learning the staff. Not their names only, though she learned those immediately, all 23 of them, on the first day, in the specific way of someone who understands that knowing a person's name is the beginning of acknowledging that they exist. She learned what they were good at. What they found difficult. What the household's rhythms were and where those rhythms had developed inefficiencies that nobody had thought to address because nobody had been paying attention. The head housekeeper was a woman named Mrs. Alderton. 61. Had managed Crestwood for 18 years. Had a way of looking at Rosalind in those first days that was not unfriendly but was not yet certain, the expression of a woman who had seen duchesses arrive before and had learned to wait and see what they actually were before investing anything in them. On the 5th day Rosalind asked Mrs. Alderton to sit with her. Not to receive instructions. To talk. She asked what Crestwood needed that it did not currently have. Not what the Duke required. What the house needed. What the people in it needed. Mrs. Alderton looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, "A person who asks that question." After that Mrs. Alderton was hers. Edmund noticed none of this. He was at the estate office by 7 each morning and rarely appeared before dinner. He managed his considerable affairs with the focused efficiency of a man who has organized his entire identity around being competent at the external things and has never once been asked what is happening internally. At dinner he was correct. He asked about her day with the attentiveness of someone performing the correct behavior. She answered with equal correctness. She did not tell him about Mrs. Alderton. She did not tell him about the unused north-facing room on the 3rd floor that she had found on her second day and had understood immediately was going to be her studio. She did not tell him about the conversation she had with the head gardener, a man named Briggs, 70, who had been tending the Crestwood grounds for 50 years and who had shown her, with the careful pride of someone sharing something precious, the specific corner of the east garden where the morning light fell in a way that had no equivalent anywhere else on the estate. She did not tell him any of it. Not out of spite. Out of something more considered than spite. She was building a life. A real one. And she had decided, clearly and without drama, that she was going to build it regardless of whether Edmund Ashford chose to be part of it. That his absence from her interior world was his loss to carry. That she was not going to perform emptiness simply because the man she had married had decided she was a function rather than a person. She set up the studio on a Thursday. She painted. The north light came through the window in exactly the way she had hoped. She worked on the coastal painting she had started at home, the grey water, the grey sky, the single figure at the far edge facing away. She worked on it for 3 weeks, adding detail, deepening the light, understanding something about the figure she had not understood when she started it. The figure was not looking at nothing. The figure was waiting. She painted for 4 hours every morning before the household required her. Then she managed the house with the focused precision that had become, over weeks, something Mrs. Alderton described to the other staff as the difference between a house that works and a house that breathes. She established a correspondence with the village school that led to a formal arrangement: 3 afternoons a week, educational material supplied from the manor library, 2 of the younger staff members trained to assist. She redesigned the kitchen garden with Briggs's input and produced, by the following spring, a yield that reduced the household's external food costs by a third. She learned the names of every tenant family on the estate, their children, their situations. She was not performatively charitable about this. She did not arrive with baskets and expressions of gracious concern. She arrived with attention. She listened. She remembered. She followed up. The estate, quietly and without announcement, came alive. Edmund noticed that things worked better. He did not yet understand why. It was at the Pemberton winter reception, 4 months into the marriage, that something first shifted. Lord Pemberton, a man of 70 with the specific sharp attention of someone who has spent a lifetime observing people more powerful than himself, was speaking to Edmund in a group of 6 when he said, "Your Duchess has done something remarkable with the East Garden. Briggs has been managing those grounds for 50 years and he told me last week it was the best the estate had looked in 20 years. He credited the Duchess entirely. Edmund said, "Rosalind has been spending time with Briggs." Lord Pemberton said, "More than that. She redesigned the entire East Quadrant. Did you not know?" Edmund looked across the room. Rosalind was standing near the far window in deep blue, speaking to Lady Pemberton with the specific engaged attention she brought to every conversation, the look of someone who is genuinely interested in what the other person is saying rather than waiting for her turn to speak. Edmund watched her for a moment. Something moved in his face. Small. Almost nothing. He looked away. But he had looked. On the carriage ride home he said, "I was not aware you had redesigned the East Garden." She said, "Briggs and I worked on it together. He has 50 years of knowledge about those grounds. I simply asked the right questions and organized what he already knew." Edmund was quiet. Then he said, "Pemberton said it was remarkable." She said, "Briggs is remarkable. I had the easier part." He looked at her. She looked out the carriage window at the dark passing countryside. He said, "What else have you been doing that I am not aware of?" She said, "A great deal, I expect." The silence after that was different from every silence before it. She had not said it with bitterness. She had said it with the specific honest simplicity of a fact being stated. And Edmund Ashford, Duke of Crestwood, a man who had organized his entire existence around knowing everything relevant to his affairs, understood, for the first time, that something relevant to his affairs had been happening directly in front of him and he had not been paying attention. He started paying attention. Not dramatically. Not with the announced intention of a man who has decided to change. Simply with the quiet incremental shift of someone who has noticed a gap in their information and has begun, instinctively, to close it. He arrived at breakfast before she left for the studio one morning and noted the paint on her hands that she had not entirely removed. He said nothing. But he noted it.
"Stop right here." Edmund just found the north room. He just stood in front of a painting of himself not watching her. No argument. No confrontation. Just the truth hanging on a wall in north light. And now he has to decide what to do with it. Have you ever been seen more clearly by someone's silence than by anything they ever said out loud? Tell me in the comments on Regent Hearts. Keep watching.
He came home from the estate office an hour earlier one Thursday and found the house carrying the specific quality of warmth and purposeful activity that he had been absorbing without identifying for 4 months. He stood in the hallway and actually felt it for the first time. Looked at it. Tried to understand its source. He walked upstairs. He found the north room. The door was open. She was not there, she had finished for the morning. But the room was there. The paintings were there. He stood in the doorway. The coastal painting was on the main easel. Gray water under gray sky. The single figure at the far edge facing away. The light in the painting was doing something he could not immediately name, something about the quality of the gray, the way the water moved without moving, the specific quality of the figures waiting. He looked at it for a long time. Then he looked at the other canvases stacked along the wall. Portraits, not of grand subjects, not of the posed formal kind. Of people. Mrs. Alderton sitting in the kitchen with her afternoon tea, captured in 3/4 profile with the specific expression of a woman allowing herself a private moment. Briggs in the east garden on one knee examining something in the soil, his 70-year-old face carrying the focused devotion of someone doing the thing they were made for. Clara, Rosalind's sister, clearly, caught mid-laugh with the unguarded joy of someone who has forgotten they might be observed. He moved through the canvases slowly. He found, near the back, a small painting he did not immediately understand. A man sitting at a desk in a well-appointed study, seen from behind and slightly to the side. Dark coat. The posture of someone working with efficient focus. Through the window beyond the desk a garden was visible, a woman in the garden, small, doing something with the plants, the morning light on her back. The man at the desk was not looking at the window. He was looking at the desk. Edmund stood very still. He understood what he was looking at. He had not posed for this painting. She had painted him from observation, from the accumulated evidence of 4 months of watching him not watch her. She had rendered his absence with the specific honest clarity of someone who sees things as they are rather than as she wished them to be. It was not an angry painting. That was the thing that reached him. It was not accusatory. It was not cruel. It was simply true, the specific unflinching truth of a north light that does not lie. He stood in the doorway of that room for a long time. Then he went to find his wife. She was in the east garden with Briggs, examining something in the spring growth, her back to the house the same way the figure in the painting faced away from the viewer. He stood at the garden gate and watched her, actually watched her, with the full attention he had been withholding for 4 months, and understood that he was watching someone who was entirely, completely, unself-consciously alive. Not performing aliveness for his benefit. Simply alive. She turned. She saw him at the gate. Her expression was the composed unhurried one he had seen every day for 4 months, the one he had registered as the correct expression of a correct duchess performing correctly, which was what he had needed from her and therefore what he had seen. He understood now that he had been reading it completely wrong. It was not performance. It was patience. The specific patient expression of a woman who has decided to be fully herself regardless of whether the person she married is paying attention, and who has been doing exactly that every single day for 4 months, and who is now looking at her husband standing at the garden gate and waiting, without pressure and without performance, to see what he does. He opened the gate. He walked toward her. Briggs, with the specific tactful intelligence of a man who has been observing people in this garden for 50 years, found an urgent reason to be elsewhere. Edmund stopped in front of her. He said, "I found the north room." She said, "I know. Mrs. Alderton told me." He said, "The painting. The one of the desk." She looked at him. She said, "The north light does not lie. My father told me that when I was 15. It is the only rule I paint by." He said, "You painted me not watching you." She said, "I painted what was true." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said something she had not expected. He said, "I said something on the morning of our wedding. In the East Corridor. I believe you may have heard it." She was very still. He said, "I know you heard it. I have known since the wedding breakfast. The way you looked at me when you arrived at the altar. I understood then that you had heard, and I told myself it did not matter because what I had said was true and I had no obligation to pretend otherwise." She said, "And now?" He said, "And now I have stood in a room looking at evidence of a person I have spent 4 months failing to see. And I need to tell you that what I said in that corridor was the most incomplete thing I have ever said about anything. That it revealed not an accurate assessment of our arrangement but a profound failure of my own, my failure to understand that what I was describing as nothing more was in fact the entire thing. That a woman who gives a man a son and nothing more gives him a function. And a function is not what you have been offering me. It is not what you are. She looked at him for a long moment. The east garden around them. The spring morning. The light falling across the new growth the way she had planned it to. She said, "You said it in the voice of a man who believed it completely." He said, "I know." She said, 11 words. "I have been carrying them since before I walked down that aisle." He said, "I know that too." She said, "Why did you marry me if that was all you believed I was for?" He said, "Because I had decided that was all marriage was for. That it was a function like every other function I had organized my life around. That wanting more from it was a form of weakness I had specifically decided not to have. That the man who taught me that had been my father and I had watched him run this estate and this family with complete efficient precision for 30 years and I had taken that as the model without ever examining whether the people inside it were alive." She said, "And are they alive?" He said, "My mother is the most managed unhappy woman I have ever known. My father died at 61 without having once asked a single person in his household what they actually needed. I have spent 4 months watching you ask everyone what they actually need and receiving answers that have made this estate more alive than it has been in 20 years. I have spent 4 months being the man at the desk not looking out the window. And I am standing here because I do not want to be that man for the rest of my life." She looked at him. The patience was still there in her expression. But something else was there now too. Not softness. She was not a soft woman and she was not about to become one because he had found the north room and understood a painting. Openness. The specific openness of someone who has kept a door unlocked for 4 months without knowing whether anyone was going to come through it, and who is now watching someone arrive at the threshold and deciding whether to step back and let them in. She said, "I heard you say it. 11 words. And I made a decision standing in that corridor that I was going to build a life inside this marriage that was completely real regardless of whether you were in it. Not to prove something to you. Because I did not know how to be any other way." He said, "I know." She said, "I am not going to pretend those words were not said." He said, "I would not ask you to." She said, "And I am not going to perform forgiveness before I have actually arrived at it." He said, "I understand that." She said, "But I am also not someone who decides the future based only on the worst thing that has happened in the past. I am someone who looks at what is true right now with the north light on it and decides from there." She looked at him. She said, "So I need to ask you one question. And I need you to answer it with the same honesty I have been giving this place since September." He said, "Ask it." She said, "Do you want to know me? Not what I produce. Not what I manage. Not the estate yields or the village school or the East Garden. Me. Rosalind. Do you want to know who that actually is?" He looked at her. For the first time, the actual first time, not the social approximation of it, Edmund Ashford looked at his wife with the complete undefended attention of a man who has taken down every wall and is standing in the open and has decided that the exposure is worth it. He said, "Yes." She said, "Then come and see the north room properly. I will show you what I have been working on." She turned and walked toward the house. He followed. That was where it actually began. Not the wedding. Not the 11 words. Not the 4 months of managed dinners and correct silences. A garden in spring and a question asked with Northlight honesty and a man who finally answered it true. In the months that followed, Edmund Ashford became, slowly and without announcement, a different kind of man. Not a transformed one. Rosalind did not believe in transformations, she believed in the slow honest work of people choosing to be better than their inheritance. He was still precise. Still efficient. still carried the bones of a man who had been taught that function was the highest form. But he began to ask questions. Not the correct ones. The actual ones. He asked Briggs about the East Garden and listened for 40 minutes without looking at his watch. He asked Mrs. Alderton what the household needed and received an answer that took an hour and that he took notes on. He came to the north room on Thursday mornings and sat in the chair in the corner while Rosalind painted, and they talked or did not talk, and both were the right thing depending on the morning. He found out that she had been painting since she was 12. That the coastal painting was based on a view she had seen once from a cliff in the West Country when she was 16 and had been carrying in her mind ever since. That the figure at the edge was not a specific person but a feeling, the feeling of standing at the place where the known world ends and deciding what to do about what comes next. He told her about his father. Not the efficient version, the real one. The 30 years of watching a man manage everything around him at the cost of everyone inside it. The specific inheritance of a boy who had been taught that wanting was weakness and that the correct response to any human need was to organize it into functionality. She listened the way she always listened, with complete attention and no performance, and the specific honesty of someone who will tell you what she actually thinks when she is ready to tell you. She said, "You have been running this estate and this marriage the way your father ran his. Not because you believed it was right. Because you had not yet been given a reason to examine whether it was." He said, "Yes." She said, "I gave you a reason." He said, "You gave me the north room." She looked at him. She said, "I gave you the truth. The north room was just where I kept it." At the Pemberton summer reception, 8 months into the marriage, Lord Pemberton asked Edmund how Crestwood was faring. Edmund said, "Better than it has in 20 years. The Duchess has made it into something I did not know it could be." Lord Pemberton looked at him with the sharp old attention. He said, "And how is the Duchess?" Edmund looked across the room. Rosalind was standing with Margot and Lady Pemberton, laughing at something with the specific unguarded warmth of a woman who is completely herself in the room she is in, paint faintly visible at the edge of her left wrist where she had not quite cleaned it off, deep blue gown, no performance anywhere in her posture. He said, "She is the most honest person I have ever encountered. And I wasted 4 months not seeing her." Lord Pemberton said, "And now?" Edmund said, "And now I see her." He crossed the room. He stopped beside her, not in front of her, not as the Duke arriving to collect his Duchess, but beside her, the way you stop beside someone when you have decided that where they are is where you want to be. She turned. She looked at him with the expression he had spent 4 months misreading as the correct performance of a correct wife. He understood it now. It had never been performance. It had always been patience. The specific patience of a woman who had walked down an aisle knowing the truth, who had built a life with Northlight honesty inside a marriage that began with 11 words, and who had kept the door unlocked every single day waiting to see whether the man she had married was going to become the man she had looked for. He was standing beside her at a reception with 200 people around them, and he was present. Actually present. She smiled. Not for the room. For him. He said quietly, close enough that only she could hear, "I owe you 11 words." She said, "You owe me better than 11 words." He said, "I know. I have been working on it." She turned back to the conversation. But her hand found his at her side. And she held it. Not dramatically. Not for the room. Simply held it the way you hold something you have decided to keep. Outside, the summer evening moved across the Pemberton Gardens in the specific way of light that knows it has done something right today. Warm and unhurried. Falling on everything without preference. The Northlight summer cousin, equally honest, considerably warmer. Rosalind Vane had walked into a marriage knowing the worst thing about it before the ceremony began. She had not collapsed. She had not performed. She had brought her Northlight with her, and she had painted what was true, and she had built something real inside a space that had been given to her as a function. And the man who had called her nothing more was standing beside her in a summer garden holding her hand and learning, slowly and honestly and at real cost, what more actually looked like. It looked like her. It had always looked like her. He had simply needed the north light to see it. Before you leave. Rosalind heard 11 words through a door that was not fully closed. She will give me a son and nothing more. And she made a choice right there in 16 feet of ivory silk. Not to run. Not to rage. Not to perform the wound of it for an audience. To see clearly. To build honestly. To bring the north light into every room she entered and paint only what was true. That is not patience as weakness. That is patience as the most powerful thing a person can choose. Because Rosalind Vane understood something that Edmund Ashford took 4 months and a north-facing room to learn. You cannot be truly seen by someone who has not yet learned to look. And you cannot teach a person to look by performing yourself smaller. You teach them by being so completely, honestly, unapologetically yourself that eventually the truth of you becomes impossible to look away from. That is what she did. And it worked. Not because she needed it to. Because she never once stopped being worth it. Subscribe to Regent Hearts. Share this with one person today who needs to hear it. And tell me in the comments, which moment reached you the hardest. Was it the 11 words through the door? The north light that does not lie? The painting of the man at the desk not watching? Or the hand held quietly in a summer garden? I read every single one. See you in the next story. Because there is always another one worth telling.
She heard 11 words through a door. She will give me a son and nothing more. And she did not collapse. She lowered her veil. She walked down that aisle. She built something real inside a marriage that began with those words. Not for him. For herself. And that is what he finally saw. Subscribe to Regent Hearts. Share this with someone who needs it today. I read every comment. See you in the next story.